Hello everyone, how are we doing today? How is everyone going? Hello Abzasi, hello Peter Dawson, hello John Shea, hello Captain C4, hello Tanner Parker, hello Carmen Gasberg, hello George Newman, hello Michael Coach, hello HMS Verdun, hello Colin Cameron, hello James, Steve Richards, hello Wayne, hello Stafford, how are we all doing? For anyone else, yes. Corn on the cob, because I fancy some veg today, and this is about what I'll accept. Hello DG40, hello Mr. Shaw, Band Home, Melanie, hello, Anna, hello Emily, hello Aaron Cash, how are we all doing tonight? Hi Glenn. Glenn is so happy I'm not doing his books again this week, but you never know. Might be doing them again when I come back. My coach, how's the situation with the poisoned soil? All sorted? Alliance? How's nutrition? About bilge pumps. Where can I find the links that were stated that they will be part of the program, e.g. reports to Class Loop? They obviously haven't uploaded, in which case I will go and fix the description to make sure they're uploaded again. Am I feeling better? I'm eating vegetables. That's not usually a good sign for me. Hi, John Luke. So, how are we all doing this evening? Is assistant allowed to have corn? No. When you were talking about Signet in the video the other day, it reminded me about Rodney going completely dark during the hunt for Bismarck. I heard this was to hide from the UK as much as the Germans. Is that true? Yes. And Wien did the same thing. Renown, Wien, Rodney all went completely silent. That sounds like a very good day off. Right now, mucking with Photoshop, solar systems map, and finding data of the United Nations. Well, you see, the founding date of the United Nations gets interesting when you talk to some of the people who start to try and date it to the League of Nations. Mainly because they wanted to sort of see as it was a not a post World War II reaction to what had gone horribly wrong, but a continuation improvement on that model. That model, of course, had suffered severely because America had refused to join it and various other decisions made about it. I've heard the same news. I've not got any idea about what Prince of Wales has had bumping back into Portsmouth, but I'm sure they fix it quite quickly. Sure, that wasn't good noise in regards to death toll. No, my sister is incredibly ill today, so I haven't actually gone out to a birthday party I was planning to go to with a friend I hadn't seen in 4 years because I thought it better to sit around at home and be here if I needed. True. Just a little stiff. Went bouldering yesterday for the first time. Bouldering is not good to go for the first time. It's always fun. That's good, Glenn. You're going for the post-World War II date. That I accept. Well, that's actually an interesting thing. Where Glenn should just point out where the Allies are usually referred to as the United Nations. Post America's entry into the war, America does a concerted effort to get every nation they can to join the war against Germany and Japan. This is why South America is dragooned in. This is why all sorts of countries are dragooned in to form the United Nations of the Allies against Germany and Japan. We like to claim building a modern political mandate for operations is something new. It's not. We've been doing it for centuries. In fact, if you want an interesting thing, look up the International Squadron at the Cretan incident back in the late 1800s. There you go. There's another international squadron there. Also sometimes referred to as the United Nations. Waiting toward the sunset. So talking Rodney and her captain. He was a destroyer man. Was it normal to assign destroyer captains to nail rods? And what about other captainships? Yes, destroyer captains could come up and command larger ships, especially good ones. Admittedly, there were speed freaks who were overly aggressive in pretty much everything they were put in, but it was good to have one or two in them occasionally. What is bouldering? It's sort of a version of rock climbing, but it's one where you usually stick to sort of lower levels, and you don't tie in. So you're keeping to sort of safe-ish routes. John Luke, HMS Rodney's captain was a fan of the red racing stripe. Make things go fast. HMS Rodney's captain pretty much was down in the engine room every chance he could get going to the engineers. How much faster can we get this thing to go? So, refamily help. Does your mum have contacts to Lord still for good barrister in case needed? Oh, I have a very good barrister friend. If needed, I have a very, very good barrister. I have the kind of barrister who is lovely as a friend. You do not want to face him in court. He will take great delight in taking every part of your life to pieces and destroying it. So, we have Iron Brew. I have had my breakfast now. When I say I've had my breakfast, I do apologize for having the food in front of you all, but that was literally my breakfast because I've been dealing with things so much today. I actually haven't eaten until now. At all. So, I knew it would be naughty starting out, but I also thought it would be more sensible to have actually had some food in my system before I start drinking some Iron Brew. Because otherwise it will just flow straight through my system. Honourable, do you have any insights on the condition of HMS Manxton shortly before her fire in 1969? How strong could she be used? Honestly, probably you're talking 1975. She'd had to be gone out of service at the latest. If not before then. Now, I am going to say again, thank you to all the people who've been sending me money on PayPal, etc., towards new computer build. It's very kind of you. I said it's going to happen in September. If the paychecks come through on time, I've got I've got a large. Basically, the plan is financially. It's looking like it's going to be about half from very kind gifts from people over PayPal, the money from Patreon and YouTube, and half from paychecks, and that should allow me to do it all and have a completely new computer system by the end of September running in here. Well, we'll consider KFC a start on a good healthy diet. They do send coleslaw, which is going in my fridge. So, cruisers. And new books. I'm going to start off with the new books because they're pretty darn cool. And because one of them is a subject close to my heart. And one of them is written by an author who I have absolutely massive respect for him. And he's one of the people I would like to be when I grow up in terms of publishing books. The other is written by an author who is new to me, and I'm slightly sad is new to me because I think they've probably written some pretty cool books. I also like what they put at the front. So, this is the first one. It's The Pirate Captain Ned Lowe. His Life and Mysterious Fate by Nikki Nielsen. And the dedication reads like this. For Debbie, the sailor of the family. Now, I don't know if Debbie's his wife, his sister, his daughter, but I just love that dedication. One of the things that will always make me interested in a book is the dedication. I am that sad. I will check and read the dedication, and if it's a good dedication, I trust the book more, because if you dedicate it to someone you care about, you're going to have put more effort into it, is my theory. Now, for those of you who are interested in pirates, Ned Lowe is very, very cool. And thank you, Atris Verdun, for the donation towards the Brew and Tower Fund. And, yeah. Hi, Greg Sarsi. Hi, Seneca Nera. This is a very cool book. So, first things first. They've got some cool plates in here. These are, of course, mostly period paintings and pictures and sketches, but it does provide you an interesting idea of what they look like and what was going on. And this is one of the more interesting passages from one of the more interesting chapters. I mean, it's all very interesting. So I'm saying more interesting as being as a, let's say, out of 10, for it to be an interesting chapter, it's got to be scoring 6, 7. Right? Most of these chapters come in at 7, 8. This is one of the ones which comes in at 9. They're 9-ish, 10, depending on the section. And this is on my scale of me going to use this for teaching, not just me as enjoyable general read. This is me as this is a book good enough on piracy I can give it to students to teach from. Unfortunately for the citizens of both Rhode Island and Massachusetts, the genuine efforts of Governor Cranston to capture Ned Lowe failed. The two armed sloops that had left Newport on around the 4th of June 1722 returned to the port a few days later to report that the Rebecca was nowhere to be found. Lowe had judged his timing just right. He had terrorized the seas off Rhode Island for only a few days and taken several prizes, but had known to quit while he was ahead. Now the Rebecca was heading northeast towards the fishing grounds of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Lowe was keen to build up his crew, and for that he needed more recruits, willing or otherwise. In addition, he would need either a second ship to alleviate the cramped conditions on board the Rebecca, or alternatively a larger ship. En route to Nova Scotia, however, Lowe and his crew spotted a small whaling sloop, heading out to sea from the port of Nantucket. The sloop was commanded by a man named Hussey, and crewed by less than a dozen men, most of them being members of the Wampanoag community of Martha's Vineyard. Many Wampanoag were frequently employed in the nascent New England whaling industries. Indeed, one of the characters of Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Tasego, is described as being a member of the Wampanoag community. Lowe and his crew boarded the small whaling ship and forced most of the whalers to join them. 2 white men and either 4 or 5 Native Americans. Among those was Thomas Mumford, who had remained with Lowe's crew for more than a year before being captured following a battle with HMS Greyhound in 1723. During this trial, after which he was acquitted, Mumford, speaking through an interpreter, described how he and his friends were carried away from their ship by Lowe and the pirates. Shortly afterwards, hanged two of his friends near Cape Sable Island, on the southernmost tip of Nova Scotia. An article published in the New England Courant on 8th of June 1722 describes the attack on the Nantucket sloop. We hear that one hussy of Nantucket was taken last week by a pirate brigantine. They took it from him 2 white men, 4 Indians, and a new mainsail, and then dismissed him. Another article, published a few weeks later in the Boston Newsletter, contains further details, including a description of the atrocities committed by Lowe and his men against some of them Wampanoag whalers. The pirate Lowe, upon our coast, has taken to the eastwards, upon upwards of a dozen of our men, whom he plundered and robbed of all their clothes and provisions, and used them very barbarously. 2 Nantucket Indians are, after cruel usage, the pirates hanged. Some time after this event, a sea captain reported finding the headless corpse of a Native American, bound hand and foot, floating in waters through which the Rebecca had passed, further evidence of the degree of wanton cruelty of which Lowe and his crew were capable. After this display of senseless brutality, Lowe and his crew stopped off at a nearby island, where they stole some sheep before again heading northeast towards Port Roseway to strike terror among the New England fishing fleet. It's a very, very cool book. Second, dedicated to my cat Tiger, who accidentally deleted the first final draft of this book. That is very good. Hello, RG. That's good. Oh, hi, a hussy of Nantucket. Sounds like a pub name. It's a very good book to read. And it's £20 in the UK, $34.95 in the US, according to the back. So, thank you, Stafford. No, June, KFC is not a healthy diet. No, it is not. But it was the only thing that would be delivered in time that I would actually be able to have some iron brew. Harwich Striking Force by Steve R. Dunn. Now, you will have heard of Steve before. He's got a book up there, which you can see, which is called Blockade, which is all about the First World War. There is another book around here which is about trawlers, etc., used by the Royal Navy, which is by Steve Dunn. He's one of those historians who's reached the point that he seems financially stable enough and secure enough that he writes the books he feels like writing, sends them to the publishers, and they publish them. In that criteria, he is sort of up there with Andrew Lambert, Norman Freeman. And he is one of the nicest people you will meet. He is really nice and really cool. This is a new book, The Harwich Striking Force. And it's all about the Royal Navy's front line in the North Sea, 1914 to 1918. Anyway. Amber, would after World War I, could the German Navy have any dreadnought capital ships? They weren't allowed any. They were only allowed pre-dreadnoughts under the Treaty of Versailles. This book is good. It has, again, very cool pictures in it. And honestly, other than Tirrett's own account, this is possibly one of the best accounts I've ever had the pleasure of reading of the Harwich Force. and what they get up to in World War One. And let's see. Battle of Dogger Bank and beyond. German raids on the east coast in 1914 were intended to cause a portion of the Grand Fleet or the battlecruisers to come out and be isolated and defeated in detail by the High Seas Fleet. But each had occasioned the British fleet coming out in one strength or another and nearly catching the German battlecruisers, the reverse of what was intended. Hipper convinced himself that this must be because the British or neutral fishing vessels in the Dogger Bank area were reporting his movements to the British, and he was determined to put an end to it. The plan was to send the battle cruisers, a first scouting group, to clear the area of fishing vessels and dubious neutrals, and to attack any small Royal Navy warships that they came across, with the High Seas Fleet covering the withdrawal. This limited operation conformed to the ban by the Kaiser on aggressive moves by the High Seas Fleet, which had been reiterated on 10th of January. What Hipper did not realise was the Royal Navy was able to read German signals, and that it was Room 40, the signals intelligence group at the Admiralty, that was giving warning of his operations. As Hipper prepared for his new mission, Room 40 was once again able to issue an alert. It was this alert which had led to the cancellation of the planned 24th of January attack on Cuxhaven. The first scouting group and their support sailed on 23rd of January and comprised 3 battlecruisers, Seydlitz, Molt and Der Flinger. Von der Tann was still under repair from the effects of the Cuxhaven air raid and was replaced by the slower and less well-armed heavy cruiser Blucher. There were also 4 light cruisers and a strong destroyer flotilla. Beatty, with his battlecruisers and Goodenough's first light cruiser squadron, together with Turret and the Harwich flotilla, were ordered to rendezvous on the northeast part of the Dogger Bank, and the ground fleet were directed to holding positions further north. With the Commodore, where his 3 Arethusa-class light cruisers and 35 destroyers. Despite some fog, Turret met Beatty at 0700 hours on 24th, with Arethusa and 7 fast M-class destroyers led by Captain the Honourable Herbert Meade. In Meteor, Aurora and Undaunted were 13 miles astern with the rest of the destroyers. Here the trailing cruisers sighted SMS Kohlberg. 12 10.5 centimetre guns, 4.1 inch guns, with 4 destroyers in company. Nicholson, in Aurora, and wanting to be certain, ordered a challenge by searchlight, which brought the response of a single letter flash from the German light cruiser, and a burst of gunfire, which was immediately returned. The German fire was accurate, but fell off as Kohlberg sustained hits. Nevertheless, Aurora was struck 3 times. The German received a hit below the waterline, and after a shell exploded under her forebridge, Kohlberg was turned away and headed east. Aurora and Undaunted then resumed their course. However, they next observed enemy forces far off their starboard quarter and turned to keep them in sight. This brought them in touch with Southampton and the 1st LCS, light cruiser squadron, to whom they reported the presence of the German ships they'd seen. A few minutes later, Goodenough spotted the German-made body, which, having spread out for a sweep of the area, had hastily concentrated on receiving the alarm from Kohlberg. Meanwhile, having seen the gun flashes, Beatty worked up speed to give chase, with Turret and his M-class vessels in company, and by 0750 hours, he could see the smoke of the German battlecruisers. Hipper had turned away, was making all steam to escape to the southeast. Turret was ordered to take his destroyers and get ahead of Beatty's force to scout the ships he was opposing. To his chagrin, Turret, on Beatty's disengaged side, could not get enough speed out of Arethusa to overtake the barreling Lion and her kindred. But the M-class were the fastest destroyers in the fleet, and were unleashed to go ahead. As they worked up to their full speed of 35 knots, they closed the range to 9,000 yards before the rearmost enemy ship, Blucher, altered course to open fire and forced them to turn away. But as soon as Blucher resumed her progress, Meade carried on, and was able to close and report course and strength. The destroyers were recalled, and Turret dropped back so as not to foul the battlecruiser's range with his smoke. But then, at 0920 hours, Beatty ordered him ahead again to counter what appeared to be a developing German torpedo attack. Once more, his ships could not pass the battlecruisers, and he had to send Meade and his brood on alone. But no such action came. The running fight, which now developed, has been described many times. It did not really involve the Harwich force. It therefore seems redundant to cover it in detail here. Sufficient to say that in the stern chase, lasting several hours, Lion received a hit which crippled her, causing Beatty to lose control of the tactical situation. Moreover, an emergency turn away from a non-existent submarine and imprecise signalling on by BT's flag lieutenant caused the British force to focus on Blucher, which was set ablaze and wrecked, whilst allowing the remainder of Hibbert's ship to escape. Before they did so, Meteor had led 3 other destroyers into a torpedo attack against the Blucher and was hit by a shell in the forward boiler room, which put her out of action, killing 3 stokers outright and wounding 2 men, one of whom, another stoker, died the following day. Probationer Surgeon James Alexander Stirling, a Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, courageously descended into the stokehold after the Meteor had been hit, and by candlelight amputated a leg of a stoker which was badly fractured, and jammed amongst a mess of twisted iron and steel caused by the shell. Stirling received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions. Meteor was eventually towed back to the Humber by the destroyer Liberty. The first DF destroyer flotilla, Harwich destroyer, attack had the privilege of going alongside the injured line at 11:34 hours, no small feat of seamanship by Lieutenant Commander Cyril Callaghan, for which he was mentioned in dispatches, to take off Beatty for transfer to the battlecruiser Princess Royal. Until 12:20 hours, when the Admiralty gained the battlecruiser, his flag proudly flew from the little 770-ton Acheron-class destroyer. This is a cool book. It's written by a very good author. It's a very cool book. And it's cruiser-based and destroyer-based, so it fits today. I'm presuming, and this one has a similar issue with its costings, because UK £25, US $42.95. I'm presuming the difference is taxes, Melanie. Otherwise, it could be that Pen and Sword in the UK, who are publishing this in the UK, and it's USNI in the United States, have different pricing requirements. Harwich, which is just live there, pronounce Harwich with an A as in Pat. That's true. I-star operations make such a difference in the proper planning and operations. The thing I don't understand about the Germans is surely by World War II, their intelligence network had worked out, or found out, that the British had cracked their codes in World War One, and that's how they'd followed everything they were doing. In World War II, it never crosses their mind. There are some people who honestly never question whether they themselves are right. In the modern era, are there any other instances of warship stealing reminiscent of the Israeli Operation Cherbourg, where they made off with 5 missile boats from the French dockyard in the late 60s? Not that recently. I remember some interesting times in the Cold War where the British tended to nick Soviet equipment, but not that recently. It's at $18 Canadian on Canendal. I said it's really expensive for me. Yeah. This book is brand new. It is 2022. Yeah. This is brand new. Thanks for done. I have a question about the honor system. At the risk of sounding silly, what award will get you called honorable? Well, there are a fair number. If you're made a member of the Privy Council, you can be called the Honourable. Hmm. Da, 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 da. Judges, barons. It's a full. There's a full long list. In the UK, basically anyone who is a member of the House of Lords, anyone who is it can be described as put as a courtesy on legal documents. The honourable and right honourable is often used to describe members of legislature. You become right honourable when you are made a member of the Privy Council. Honourable and reverend may be used for clergy. Honourable and gallant may be used for military officers. Honourable and learned may be used for barristers. It doesn't say what they can use for academics. Right honourable is for members of the Lord Spiritual. Right Honourable Knight Citizens Burgess in Parliament Central, i.e. House of Commons. Right Honourable Lords of the Privy Council, any Privy Councillor. And, Lords Commissioner of the Admiralty are also known as the Right Honourable. Done. I meant it in the context of the book. Basically, that's the legal definition of you're being nice about someone. Listen, triangulation of radio transmissions works out needing description. This is a point I make quite often. The amount of times that people go, it's breaking the codes. No. Signals traffic analysis is far quicker and far more useful. And far more of a problem. Because the moment you use a radio, you're feeding into the signals traffic analysis data. The moment you use a radio. Or any kind of communication system. That's because in World War One the codes were simpler, so that them being broken is valid theory. World War Two they had Enigma, the Uber code machine that had millions of permutations, hence unbreakable in their eyes, unless you use the same letters, the same prefix for pretty much every message. Hail Hitler. Once you've broken that every time, you can soon work out the rest. Okay, Amelia. So, today's main topic, random books and cruises, which we'll be getting to in a second. I'm just finishing off my chicken popcorn before it gets cold. Actually, maybe they could have mailed the orders. Actually, that would have been safer. Because the British didn't have that good a Hummet intelligence, despite them consistently believing the reason the British knew what they were doing was human intelligence. It wasn't. But the thing was, that would have put a delay on communications. Honestly, telephones wires would have been a telephone wires, and setting up using the telephone system would have probably been most sensible. Rigging up community connections directly to the ships somehow would be in the sensible way, but no. That's true. Hence, when digital radios became a thing, frequency hopping became mandatory. True, but also the other thing you have to do, and I often have conversations with people is you have to keep moving, because just because you have a digitally encrypted radio with frequency hopping, if you're standing in the same place, it doesn't necessarily help you. You have to keep it moving. That's good. The signals as a bit of what happened at Bletchley Park is the only bit still kept classified. It still forms the basis of the signet process that's used today. Yep. Hello, James Duff. So, cruisers. I'm going to start off with this book, Science Ocean-Going Fleet. And the reason we're starting off with this book by Jürgen Rohr and Mikhail S. Monakov is that what's often forgotten is quite how many cruisers are considered by their plans. Quite how much of the Soviet Navy is focused on looking at cruisers. How do I explain this politely? Okay. In a chapter which is cumulatively that thick, a third of it is down to cruiser programs. And that's about the average in most of the books, in most of the sections of this book. In January 1945, the Central Ordnance KB at Moscow had started work on a new rapid-fire gun of the 220mm caliber, to be ready for tests in 1954. In 1946, Kuznetsov ordered the TSKB-17 to begin new studies for a heavy cruiser for this new weapon. But when Stalin changed the Project 82 to the 305mm guns and Kuznetsov was relieved, the design was put to one side in 1947. Because Stalin had no interest in such a ship. He was looking to his favorite ships, the Project 82 battle cruisers. When Kuznetsov returned in 1951, he renewed the project, now under the designation Project 66, and mentioned to Stalin that the cruisers of Project 68 bis would then on slips of the yards, could not stand up with their 152mm armaments to the latest US cruisers like the Des Moines class, almost 20,000 tons full loaded with their quick-firing 203mm guns, of which 3 were commissioned in 1948-49. The battlecruiser Project 82 were too expensive for such a task, so he issued a new OTZ for a Project 66 heavy cruiser, armed with his favourite 220mm guns. In April 1952, N.A. Kislev, Nikolai Alexandrovich Kislev, of TSKB-17, presented his sketch project with a displacement of 26,230 tons, standard, which was finally accepted by Stalin. It's planned to lay down in 1953 the first ship at the Marty Yard in Leningrad for a planning commissioning in 1957, and to start a series of builds at yards numbers 444 at Nikolaev, number 372 at Sovietsky Gavan, and number 402 at Molotovsk. The sketch design was reviewed in March 1953, and some revisions were completed in August 1953. And on the 23rd of December, the Naval Staff asked the Naval Academy to review it by the 1st of March 1954. But the ships were considered too large to be worthwhile against the American heavy cruisers, so the plans to build these ships were cancelled, as with the other big surface ships. Colin out and Cameron. So is signet intelligence the reason the RAF stuck with phones and the War Office with phones and runners where possible? Yep. The British were doing it to everyone else, so they knew what would happen to them. Wayne's World of Science and Technology. During the Dieppe raid, a crew used intelligence to target a German radar installation. They cut the phone wires to force the station to go live so they could use Signet on it. That's the reason. They believe the machine is unbreakable to operate. The operator's got lax. Also, the HH and weather reports and using the same code 3 days in a row did them no favours in operational security. Complacency, yes. Following on from GD Harmon's question about a warship stealing things, do you reckon the US ever recovered those North Korean missiles fired in the Pacific in 2018? No! Seriously, there is absolutely no reason some very interesting and very large civilian ships, which were absolutely entirely about oil exploration in areas which have not traditionally been explored for oil, were wandering around in similar waters where there happened that those missiles may or may not have landed. Absolutely no reason. Go and have a look at where some of the big platforms have been wandering, and I'm sure there's no connection. Irons, given that they had US's Hannibal with Operational Sand Dollar using her to fish out seek out targets of interest in the 60s, latter events of Project Arizona, I think they have a go at it. Take care, Wayne. Sure, living in Cheltenham during the height of Iran Afghanistan, the car park of GCXQ was full on the weekend. You knew that on Monday a large operation we announced on the news. See, Rich, do you rate any of the Russian paper ships? Some are very interesting. Again, though, it's more interesting to me from the perspective of it's kind of like the Graf Zeppelin, in that it's an absolutely terrible design, but if it had been built, it would have forced a massive overreaction from the British. If the Russians had built a single battleship, if the Russians had built a single battle cruiser, if the Russians had built any of the big cruisers, it would have caused a massive overreaction from the Americans and British. I mentioned, had those battleships, battle cruisers ever built by, let's say, 1960, what do you think the Western response would be? Well, nice way, if they were going to be built, they would have been started in the 1950s. If the Russians build battle cruisers in the 1950s, then Vanguard doesn't get got rid of. Iowas don't get got rid of. They probably get upgraded. And you probably see the British and the Americans building something fairly substantial to deal with them. Yes, they have carriers, but it's going to be a case of don't expect the British to suddenly cancel their carrier program in the 1960s. They weren't both building. Then how many years later did they lay down the Kirils? It's nearly it's 2 to 3 decades. I almost got into a fight on the Colby subreddit over the fact they have a Graf Zeppelin set and the ship was never built. Well, it was built, it just was never completed. There was a Hulk wandering around the world, but it was just pointless. It's one of those things where people go, oh, well, they'd have had to not build this down to build it. No, it's literally the hull is built. The engines are in there. All they need to do is actually fit it out and arm it and put aircraft on it. Don't even really need to put aircraft on it. They just need to fit it out. That would have scared the British enough. Its mere existence would have caused the British to have a panic attack. That's true. I don't imagine the KGBs would have got rid of it either. I think they probably one or two of them would have been the last two would have possibly hung around a bit longer. Archie, random idea, but what would happen if all the warships from the Ironclad era to the modern day, not in service, just appeared on surface and randomly wandered around and can't be scrapped? Well, if they can't be scrapped, there is going to be someone paying a huge amount of port fees. A huge amount of port fees. Although in the case of the British government, because technically the Crown owns the coast, they will be parking them up and down the coast and claiming that it's being parked for free. If I remember, if I remember right, some of the British, what the British learned about signet protection was because they found the Germans tapping on the phone wires in World War One in 1914-15. Oh, yeah, that had an impact on the British. The British very quickly, how do I put this? The British are great at projecting to the world that we're very nice people. We are absolutely brilliant. The amount of movies where you have Hugh Grant cast as this nice, foppish, friendly, no fret at all English gentleman. We are very good at projecting that around the world. But you always have to remember the true definition of a gentleman is that they are, in peacetime, everyone's friend. In wartime, no one wants to be their enemy. Because the whole thing of being a gentleman is you are supposed to take care of those who are weaker and protect your family, your friends, your country. And you do that best by finishing a war quickly. And you don't finish a war quickly by playing by Queensberry rules. Which the British do understand. Most of the ones we're allowed to get in command of things anyway. Occasionally we have a few interesting officers, but we try and keep them in peaceful things. Oh, it's a sound issue on my end. Is it? Yep. Then it's gone yes. Russian battlecruisers built. British. Here we go again. Yeah, the British were doing it to everyone else, let's be honest. Senator Canero, what would the reaction of the world be if all the US cruisers in the 1930s were suddenly replaced by early bucks? And the subordinate infrastructure appears also. Panic. Let's be honest. Panic. Now, you've got the support infrastructure for Burks, but have you got the production infrastructure to build more missiles, etc.? This could all have an impact, because let's be honest, the aircraft that are going to be flying against those missiles are going to be a lot cheaper than the missiles. It's going to change your financial cost effectiveness completely. But there again, the 20mm phalanx could probably wipe out most air attacks. It could be interesting, let's say. Right. If you're interested in the battle cruisers, we can talk about them. But also the battleships. On the battleships of Project 23, at the end of the war, only the third ship, the Sovetskaya Rozhaya at Molotov, was in conservation and was in conservation in the early stage of the covered dry dock. The remnants of the Sovetskaya Ukraina in Nikolaev were destroyed by the Germans when they had to evacuate the city, and the lead ship, the Sovetsky Soyuz, on the slip of the Ozhenskis yard, was partially dismantled to get materials to strengthen the defense of the besieged city. So remnants were launched to clear the slip, and remnants of the hull were used as target for weapons tests. The plan of 1945 to renew the building of Sovetskaya Rozhaya to an improved design of Project 23 NU, developed at the TSKB-4, was never really started. The dates of the design are given in Table 10.3. As mentioned, on OTZ for an improved and large battleship had already been issued in June 1941 as Project 24. When on the 27th of November 1945 it was decided to postpone the laying down of such ships until after 1955, Admiral Flotta Senior Kuznetsov ordered on 19th December 1945 that a new OTC be prepared for this battleship of 70 to 75,000 tons, with speed of 30 knots and improved armament. In 1948, the chief constructor, Efi Basilov of TSKB 17, investigated 14 variants, and on the 4th of March 1915, the selected 13th variant was presented to Stalin. It had a displacement of 72,950 tons standard, and a much more modern armament than in the first version of the project. 3 triple turrets of 406mm, 8 twin mounts of 130mm dual-purpose guns, 12 quadruple mounts, each of 45mm and 25mm, but no catapult or aircraft. To attain the requested speed of 30 knots, it was necessary to install 4 of the 70,000 horsepower turbine sets, but because Stalin was more interested in his beloved battlecruiser of Project 82, the project was not pushed ahead. And because of the great investment in one ship, some designers of the TSN N1145 thought it better to propose some variants of small battleships of 29,700 to 39,050 tons with different armaments, as shown in Table 10.3. And, yeah. By the way, I should point out that they do have some very interesting arguments, including one which would have been armed with 1 twin 457mm, 1 quadruple 220mm, as its turret armament, and that was supposed to be 31,870 tons. That basically sounds like a modern monitor. The 2 battlecruisers of Project 69 suffered the same fate of the battleships of Project 23. The Sevastopol Nikolaev was destroyed during the German occupation, and parts of the Kronstadt at Leningrad were also used to strengthen the defense of the city. But after the war, some thought was given to rebuilding the hull as an aircraft carrier, but this was not realized, and the hull dismantled. Already in May 1941, there was an OTZ for a new heavy cruiser, following to some extent the acquired German cruiser Petroblask. Previously the Lutzow, which of course was the hipper class version of Lutzow. Project 83 with 8 203mm guns, but this was not special, realized. Design changed to a heavy cruiser, as Project 82 planned in September 1943. With 20,000 At 23,000 tons, a speed of about 36 knots, and an armor of 9 210 to 230mm guns. Because the detailed design was showing that it was not possible to achieve the proposed performances with this displacement, it was in an OTC on 15th of November 1944 raised to 25 to 26,000 tons. The speed reduced to 33 knots, with an armament of 9 220mm guns in triple turrets. An exchange of 100mm dual-purpose guns following German design by 630 twin turrets. But this heavy cruiser, which was supported by Kuznetsov, did not meet Stalin's expectations, who wanted a rowdy ship. He actually used that phrase, a rowdy ship, with 305mm guns, a speed of 35 knots, and better protection, even if the displacement had to be raised again. So, Leonard, I forget his name, Dikonovich, of the TSKB-17, then TSKB-16, prepared a new design, which was presented to Stalin in 1949. Stalin wanted some changes, so that the basic technical details were approved on 25 March 1950, with the dual-purpose 130mm turrets reduced, but put into the center line to allow better arcs of fire in all directions. Stalin badly wanted these ships, and so the preparations had to be accelerated. 2 ships were to be started in the last quarter of 1951 for completion in 1954-55. The lead vessel, Stalingrad, was laid down in December 1951 at the yard number 444, Novosensko and Nikolaev, followed by the second ship, Moskva, at the Ozensky yard in Leningrad in September 1951, and the third vessel, named probably Arkhangelsk or Kronstadt, in early 1953 at Moltvosk, possibly changed to Project 82R as it was to be armed with cruise missiles, as will be mentioned later. But the ships became victims of the changes after Stalin's death, and on 23rd April 1953 they were cancelled by order of NS Khrushchev. The Stalingrad's hull was launched and used as a target during weapons tests, while the other 2 were broken up on the slips. Stalin wanted battle cruisers. If Stalin had lived for a year or 2 more, Soviet battle cruisers would have existed and the world would be very different. Because once you have battle cruisers, the odds are you end up with an aircraft carrier. And if you have a Soviet aircraft carrier large enough in the 1950s, 1960s, and battle cruisers, then you have a very different world, a strategic position for the British, for the Americans, for all the Allies to be functioning. Okay. So, that's good. Has the 1930s world got a ability to produce the fuel needed for Burks? They can in theory, because Burks can run on a pretty wide range of fuel. Not necessarily the most efficiently, but they can run on quite a wide range of fuel. That's relevant. Yeah, there were convenient accidents to limit damage and all the wires going to neutral countries, not going via Britain from Germany. Terrible! Scurrilous lies! Scurrilous lies, I hear you say. Scurrilous! This was just accidents. Things happen. Storms happen. Issues happen underwater all the time. Cables spontaneously rip apart and shear with marks which look like they've been cut. It's entirely scurrilous to accuse anything of not being entirely act of God, act of nature. Suggest anything else is just terrible, terrible. You suggesting the Honourable Royal Navy would do anything like that? The Royal Navy, gentlemen, honest, honest as the day is long. The Royal Navy, who have never purloined or appropriated or randomly just found something at all. fallen something fallen off the back of another ship. It's never happened. Archie, on the ships are reappearing. The ships in the current size are so small I couldn't include that the ships must be meant to be autonomous and not under government control with sci-fi tech while looking as they did. Panic. Panic is pretty much what would happen. You could theoretically sink them, but you probably run out of missiles before you did. Cannon Zimov. Drake called this RCN video sinking you, but politely. Well, yes, it is politely, but it's not necessarily done that politely. I have seen Canadian drivers now. More recently, I'd forgotten after years of COVID what they were quite like. But, yeah. Seriously. The main roads, what I would call motorways, freeways, etc., whatever you want to call them, around Toronto, Toronto, in Ontario are they're special, and the drivers on them are very special. Lovely people when they're outside the car. When they're in the car, they have no concept of other human beings having being worthy of a living at all. So anyway, and what would the world's reaction be if the modern USA with overseas bases and all the ships appeared in 1920? Considering one of those bases is quite a large one in Japan, I think the Japanese would be invading that base very quickly. How would World War II go? Probably start immediately. The British are probably going, excuse me, how have you got bases in the UK? There'd be a fair number of countries in the Far East where that would be a similar scenario going on. And it would not necessarily go as well for America as you might think, because there are, and you consider how many bases of those are in Germany, etc. That's a lot of technology around the world, modern technology, which would not necessarily end up in the hands of people you want it to end up in the hands of. Nighttime Productions, I don't want to spam your questions, but I have to ask. Are you going to cover the Royal Navy's GW designs for the guided missile cruiser later in the stream? Building a scratch GW96 as we speak. I am going to be talking some things about later cruisers and some of the stuff. So here's, I have to admit, there's the whole series coming September on ships, on cruisers in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, and development of protected and armored cruisers in that period. And to cover another period where I could be off doing some research and studies, off doing some research, etc. Again, if this is funding permitting, in October, there might be a whole series coming on far more modern ships, on cruisers, not cruisers, as it was. That'll be probably a shorter trip, so that requires fewer videos. Did the Russians have the infrastructure to build these ships? They had infrastructure. Whether it's the infrastructure to build these ships or not depends on your perspective. But let's be honest. It would not be fun for anyone to try and say no to Stalin. Separate note, do you know anything about a proposed British-built World War II cruiser for Venezuela? Yes, there was all sorts of discussions about that, and they were getting various things going on, including the potential of getting a Swedish cruiser or a Dutch cruiser. If the Russians did build, let's say, 2 Stalingrads, even after sunset, how long did they remain around for? Perhaps they'll serve us in the early 1990s, similar to most solos? Could well have stayed around for 40 odd years. Probably do stay around for 40 odd years. And yes, they could be out of service by the early 1990s, but what replaces them? Again, this is the Soviet Union. What are they going to replace these ships with? Yes, it could be the Kirils, but in that case, the Kirils would have to be even bigger. Yeah, let's try and avoid politics. We've got enough of history. There's enough red flags in history about politics getting involved as well. Yeah, I think it's already been talked about. Hopefully not. War breaks out. It's conventional. One of the first things both sides go for undersea Wi-Fi cabling, undersea cables, and satellites. Someone's going to try a undeniable method of taking out satellites. You can guarantee it. It'll be radio waves. It'll be microwaves. It might even be just hacking them. But some will try something to take out satellites and undersea as well as the undersea cables. That's true. If Stalin lived another year or two, it would have made a massive difference. Full stop. Oh yes. Technical. We all know the Iron has a team of trained sharks to be done saying cables. Good lord, no. Never sharks. However, the fact that, down in various, there are next to one of the very, very nice, not a naval base, but we are putting a lot of auxiliary ships down there in the south coast, in the Cornish area. There might not be that far from it a seal sanctuary. We'll leave that to one side. My gosh, if God is an Englishman, then does that mean acts of God are acts of God? Debatable. James Shannon, are we on the unfortunate loss of the towed array from your spy trawler? Look, that just, these things happen. Towed arrays go missing. Andrew, we may have seized the occasional battleship and found random armor plates for our cruisers in the 1930s, but we don't rip up your cables. That's part of the service. Royal Navy. Yeah. And the 64. I was just about to say, it'd be very curious. I'm just about to be very curious about this having Canadian mashup. That's interesting. Act of God. So it's Queen Elizabeth's second royal. Since on some island he's believed to be an incarnation of the deity. Was it Charles? Oh, having fun with that. That's it, Christopher Ryan. Now, this book is pretty darn cool. It's also quite been around for a while, so it's not that expensive. Light cruisers, as we'll talk about as furloughs, I should probably discuss them. In the 10-year program of November 1945, there were, besides the 5 pre-war cruisers of Project 68K, 25 new light cruisers planned. They are intended for the classic cruiser tasks: defending the fleet against surface and air torpedo attacks, covering convoys, undertaking raiding operations, and laying minefields. The Navy had first issued a TTZ for a cruiser of 8 to 8,500 tons stand displacement with 152mm guns. But when the TSK-17 worked on such a ship, it soon became much bigger and reached between 14.5 and 18,000 tons, and it was suggested the ships be armed with 180mm guns instead of the 152mm. In 1947, the TSKB-17 developed no less than 40 variants of the Project 65 cruiser, with 12,800 to 16,850 and 3 or even 4 triple turrets of 180mm guns to be superior to the latest US cruiser of this type, the Worcester, and the British Superb, or to be armed with 9 152mm dual-purpose guns. But Stalin did not like this project, and during a meeting at the Kremlin in 1947, it was cancelled. And Stalin wanted to have the new light cruisers built as improvements of the Project 68K. Using the proven systems and some of the German developments in fire control and stabilized 100mm dual-purpose guns. Design work was done on a TSKB-17 by again, Andrei, I think this one, Andrei Sarkovich, on the 27th of May 1947. The Project 68 BIS was approved for a series production, and the first 3 orders were put out on the 3rd of December 1947 to the yards number 189, number 194 at Leningrad, and number 444 at Nikolaev, using names that are laid down but not completed ships of the pre-war design Project 68. Sveldov, Dezatsky, and Ozetskas. The Zensky was the first to be laid down on Nikolaev on 21st December 1948, followed in October 1949 by the other 2 ships. During 1948 to 53, 18 more orders followed, 8 to the number 189 yard at Leningrad, 5 to number 194 at Leningrad, and of which 2 would be sent to Molotovsk, 3 to yard number 444 at Nikolaev, and 2 at yard number 402 at Moskov. 1 more of each was planned to be ordered in 1954, but for each of the 4 yards. The Ozensky Yard 189 built, besides the Sveldov, which was commissioned in May 1952 and surprised the public in the Western countries when it appeared, at the Coronation Parade at Spithead in June 1953. 4 more, which were commissioned from December 1952 to December 1954. Zunov, Admiral Rushkov, Admiral Alexander Surov, and Admiral Sayanin. The Marty Yard, number 194 at Leningrad, completed 2 more ships in 1952 and 53, Alexander Nevsky and Admiral Lazarov. The Marty Yard number 444 at Nikolaev in 1953 and 54 also completed 2, the Admiral Nakarov and the Mikhail Kuznetsov. And finally, number 402 at Moloska, 2 ships in 1954 and 55, the Molotovsk and the Murmansk. After completion of the first 14 ships, it was planned to complete the other 11 vessels to a changed design as Project 68 BIS ZIF, with changed AA armament and protection against radioactive fallout. But after Stalin's death in March 1953, it was decided not to lay down the last 4 vessels, which were planned to be ordered in 1954, with 1 unit for the 4 yards. But in early 1956, the decision was taken to stop the construction of the incomplete vessels, which were in the meantime planned to be rebuilt to Project 75, as is described later. So the Kronstadt Tallinn Varag lay down in 1953 and early 1954 at number 189, the Shcherkabov laid down already in 1951 at number 194, the Admiral Kanlov laid down in 1951 at numbers 444, and the Archangelish and Vladivostok laid down in 1954 at number 402 were laid up and from 1959 to 61 scrapped. The Kosmir Min and the Dmitry Podarsky, laid down in 1952 to 53 at number 194, were sent in sections to number 402 to be used for the Molotov, renamed Oratsky, Oktobraskia Revolutia in 1957, and the Murmansk under construction. From the 1950s, there are many plans to rebuild some of the aforementioned cruisers into anti-aircraft vessels armed with rockets and others to be armed with cruise missiles, as mentioned later. A new Project 84 light cruiser, for which an OTZ was issued in 1955, was not realised. It's a very cool book. Stalin's Ocean-Going Fleet. And I forget how much. I think it cost me about £10, but I don't know how much it is now. Mm-hmm. Didn't the Americans have a very big gun to take out satellites? They looked into it, didn't really work. don't know, being dyslexic and having two cats, I have to be on guard for acts of dog. Yep. Mm. Let's be nice about the let's leave the politics to one side and just have fun with naval history. No, cruises are fun things. There are a fairly large number of books as well for you to get on. Now, I had it put to one side. Where did I put it though? This is the trouble of reorganizing books 2 to 3 times a day at the moment. You do start to lose track of where you stuck them. Ah, there we go. Now, this is always a fun book. As we all know, I'm a fairly big fan of this series of books. In fact, I have another one down there which I was going to talk about today as well. But this is Birmingham. And it's by Conrad Waters. Mm-hmm. Engineer design. Does the SBS use the same open cockpit swim delivery vehicle? Two-man sub that American SEAL teams use? Not quite. Although we, of course, only know what they publicly listed as having bought. But it seems the British have a slightly different swim and delivery vehicle. Cool. Yeah. Town class cruiser. 1930s vintage. This is one of a wonderful series of books. It's not really about the writing, though. The writing is actually good, but no one buys these books for the writing, which is kind of cruel because the historian does good work and does produce good writing. It's just, well, as good as the writing is, it's got to live up to the plans, and the plans are just amazing. They really are. They're just so cool. And the trouble is, there's a level of plans which can really distract someone like me. Really distract someone like me, disturbing enough. Because you have full orientation plans. Which can allow you to think not just where the stuff is, but also how you would maneuver through the space. How you organize yourself. How you get from point A to point B. Aaron, I thought the SBS used anything they could beg, borrow, mostly steal. You have to remember, British Special Forces, there is one area which the British government almost never seems to lack money to spend on, and that's the Spec Ops. Those teams tend to get very Gucci gear. Very, very Gucci gear. the video is getting a very low frame rate for me. Anyone else? Let's I'll check the system. It's not flashing up to me as having any problems. No, it's telling me it's excellent and it's working very happily. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Christopher, just put in for my US passport last week, looking at dragging up a friend to see Buffalo Naval and hide it shortly after it. Cool, you'll enjoy both. They're worth a visit. Anyway, cool. The US Air Force settled on a converted Phoenix missile for the anti-satellite system, and while it worked, they realized it would have a large debris cloud in orbit. So tested it once and then abandoned. Yeah, pretty much. Although, whilst they tested it once, it worked. But to be honest, they've probably got some sitting around somewhere. Because if I was the US Armed Forces, there are some of my weapon systems, those weapon systems they've had over the years, I would have tested, not used, because using more than once in testing doesn't really help me. And then I would store them off to one side, and I would probably hope the politicians forget about them and never ask any questions. Yeah. Oh, one side pull out. But see what I mean about, yeah, they do good writing, but no one really cares for these books. It does excellent writing. No one really gives a hoot. Well, no, Larson, I hope you're well. Are you going to be watching the NASA rocket launch tomorrow? Probably not, but that's mainly because tomorrow I have not only teaching, but I have 7 videos to record to cover for while I'm away. And in fact, the current list of videos is just growing more and more extensive. Let's see. Yeah. There are a total of 16 videos I need to record still before I go away. So, and that's not including the a couple of 60-second videos I want to record for next week. So yes, there's a fair number I've got to record. Take care, Glenn. Seriously, wouldn't a couple of Des Moines have taken out any of those paper ships? Not necessarily. It's one of those scenarios where people are often very confident in things until you actually see them in combat. And the Russian ships were going to be very overly engineered, which would probably mean the Russian ships would be quite survivable. Overly engineered as in they were going to have a lot of, how do I put this? A lot of engineering put in them, which was very, very simple and easy to maintain, but also a lot of redundancy built into them. So they would probably be quite survivable in that sense. Anyway, I like Conrad Waters' book on tank class cruisers. It was really enjoyable to read and great to have around for pictures, plan detect. Cool. Interesting. 2 minute drawings, cameras overwhelmed. Astro, it's almost like the senior army staff all had experience at Hereford. I have no idea. you also have to remember SBS are Royal Marines, so they're part of the Navy. And the naval staff are interesting. Just closing the window a bit. Ooh. Interesting. Ouija on Belfast again on the weekend. I am in the museum again. USN hasn't had a platform capable of launching the Phoenix in a long time. SN3 don't. I hear those can wax satellites. They can wax satellites. As for the US not having a platform that can launch Phoenix. That was an interesting discussion I had a few years ago, where I made that point to someone, and they pointed out to me that, well, there are some interesting occupants in various hangars, and that the US forces are kind of like the British forces in that there are things popular. There are enough hangars. There's enough air bases that stuff gets stored, and you might not have found everything. Richards, Andrew, have you read Origin of Species? Yes. I find it eternally interesting that people turn survival of the most fit into survival of the fittest, in believing that the fittest is something which is one abstract measurement, whereas it's the most fit for the context and nuance of the situation you're in, which kind of fits with what I try and tell people about warships and weapons of war, etc. That it's not the individual metrics which matter; it's what's most fit for the scenario and the context of its operation. Brandon Larson, have you and Bill Trump's crew inviting Jingles to be guests on it? Yes. And in fact, we've nagged Drakenafel, who has Jingles details, quite a few times, but we haven't ever actually managed to organise it. We keep thinking it'd be a great idea to have him on, and then we don't for some reason. It's kind of like trying to get Kate Jameson on there. They've become sort of almost these white whales. We keep trying to get them on there. So, what's the book called again? The book was Cruiser Birmingham by Conrad Waters. It's still in print, yes. I'm pretty sure you could sling a modified missile under a B-52 and throw it up on the satellite. Maybe not a B-52, but because don't take this the wrong way, but I wouldn't like to be orientating a B-52 around the angle you'd have to be launching it at. I think you might lose the wings. I think they might shear off, even the new carbon fiber ones they're putting on. So you might end up having to go for, I don't know, a B1. That could probably do the job. RG, on the subject of cruisers, would 500 VLS cells be considered good? It would be considered interesting. I would like to see what kind of ship you're building for that level. Usually VLS cells are divisible by 6 or by 8. So to get the 500, you'd have had to have done some interesting maths. My issue is with the second half of the book concerning all the hundreds of thousands of in-between species and what he has to say about the lack of them. Honestly, you have to put it in the context of the time he's writing. Don't expect him to provide a whole solution. He's putting around a theory. He doesn't have the information we have. He doesn't have the evidence we have. He doesn't have the scientific we have, and even we don't have all the answers. It makes sense. I don't expect things to jump completely. And I also had the conversation with people because one of the things is you sit there and you have the conversation with people about faith when that comes up. And I'm not going to jump into this too much again because YouTube does tend to cut you down when you start talking too much about these things, especially when you're an education channel, not a anything else channel. But I do tend to return people to the line whenever they sort of start going, well, you know, this is how I go. There is a line in the Bible, and there's a line in many religious texts where basically God says, my ways are not your ways. And it's like Genesis, etc., and all these things. Whenever you see them written down, whenever it's written down, etc., my tender version is if the people who were writing them down, with the knowledge they had at the time, took them literally. The people who have them today, who know how long these processes all came about over, well, they don't take it literally, and that makes more sense because don't take this the wrong way, but if I was a potent, omnipresent being who lived forever, I would not be dividing my life up into 24-hour chunks. I'd probably go absolutely insane. That's the equivalent of dividing my life up into milliseconds on that schedule. Which I had to say, for thinking that, I was once told I was being blasphemous. And I was sort of going, but it makes sense. And I was told, no, you're not supposed to think like that. And I went, okay, fine. But that might explain why me and my experience with the C of E has not always been the most interesting one. The most successful. Right. Darius, the Phoenix was a very needy missile. Yes, it was. They needed coolant circulated from the carrying aircraft. That's not something easily added. No, it needed a lot of work. Sure, you know, I have a biomedical degree, and I've never read Origins, and I've got modern textbooks that say the same thing, but with genetics. That's good. Amaram does it better now. The tech has made the AIM-54 Phoenix effectively obsolete. There are a few good missiles out there. Meteor is one which is very interesting. And the fact that there is some talk about doing a Meteor ER has really interested me. I think that was at the defense event that me and Drac went to. I heard a couple of people discussing Meteor ER and extended range even now on Meteor, and I was sitting there going, that'll be scary. Margaret, if I wanted to suggest a topic for one of 60 second vids, what's your preferred comment channel? Well, some people sent it to me over Discord. Some people have put a comment on the thing I have on the in the community page on the YouTube, which is the easiest way. And others have just commented on other videos, and I see them and I go, "Oh, okay." Hmm. Phoenix only worked with their 14. They were symbiotic. The assets aren't Phoenix derived. There were some interesting things about Asset and Phoenix. They certainly had some commonality going on there. Irons, for the unmanned, uncrewed sub that was talked about as part of Belgium's, have you ever thought about using something like an RTG like they do with spacecraft? We've talked about some things. RG, Dr. Clarke, the 500 VLS cells was me slicing number in half from various BBGs I was messing with in spring sharp and ship bucket parts. Whilst also sticking on World War II gun batteries. That would scare the bejesus out of people. Right. Because basically I am using this as a chance to talk about these books. Shamelessly. And it's always shameless. So this is British Warship Second World War. And I like these books because the reason I like these books and I'm talking so much about these books is so far I talked to a few people this week who didn't know these books existed. And that annoyed me. As though people are expected to know these books existed, mainly because they were in the reading list. Sorry. But if me and the librarian go to the trouble of putting together a reading list and making sure the library has the books, I'm sorry, but it behoves you to have gone and actually looked at it if you're a student. And you're paying for the privilege. You're not paying for me to read the books. I've already read them. Enjoyed them, writing my own versions of them. It's you who needs to read them. That's why it's called in the UK reading for a degree. You're supposed to be reading. To be honest, I did. That's one of the reasons why when what's his name? Which movie? Robin Williams and who is the young man? Oh, he's quite famous now. Good Will Hunting. When he says you could have got your degree for a this, and a $1.45 in library charges or something like that. I sit there and go, yeah, you can, to an extent. Because the whole point is you're supposed to be reading roughly for every hour you have taught to you a week. You're supposed to be doing roughly 4 hours worth of reading and note taking on the books and the stuff on the reading list in the library. And I realise people have jobs and things and can't do that, which is why we do stick some books in bold to give them a hint, give a hint as to what is the core reading, and then the other stuff is italicized. And it's a case of please pick some of these. You don't have to read all of them, but read some of them to gain further knowledge. And you come to the lectures, and we give you the information to stitch all that reading together. That's the point. It's independent study. That's part of the degree. The whole purpose of a degree really is to show people and show employers you're able to go and do independent work of a sufficient standard without them having to train you up, that they are taking you at a level at which you can already go and fulfill this level of work to this level of criteria with this level of competency and quality. Hey ho. But yeah, read the reading list. That's the first thing, and then get the books from it. That might help, especially the core books. And they are in the library, and if they're a core book, i.e. they're a bold one, and it's a decent university, then there should be, roughly speaking, either if they're books which are easy to get in understand and follow in digital form, there'll be a digital license. If they're not, there will be a formula worked out, either in some universities, for every student who's taking a module where it's a core book will have primary access to the books, and there will be a guaranteed copy in the library for them, or some variation down below that. Matt, I wasn't sure. Matt Damon, yes. But no, this book is slightly more about the writing. Slightly more. Why is it the moment I get these books out, it suddenly goes, there is some issue with the streaming. It is, is too much complication coming through. Error, YouTube is not receiving enough video. Well, according to this, it's going through fine, so I have no idea what you're talking about. Every religion I know of says God created man, or variations thereof. That includes the space between one's ears. So failing to use that, it should be blasphemous. That would make sense, but that's logic. And the trouble is, I don't have a problem with religion. I do have a problem with some of the people who run religions. Lance, would love to see a Zumwalt class with triple 8-inch turret off at Des Moines, class cruiser and the rest of VLS. That would be fun. Sure. How many tens of millions do you want to spend on PU-238 to run a PC? There's barely enough 238 for spacecraft projects. The compression is not like the writing. Well, I think it's how do I put this? I can always tell when it's just about to, because the CPU goes up to 100% usage, and because the CPU on this computer fills in a lot for the graphics card. The graphics card is about half the CPU, and I'm watching and then I get the frames per second scenario coming up, and that's dropping down to, it's supposed to be at 30 frames per second. It's sort of 28, 26, 27. When it gets to 100%, then it goes back to 30, and then it drops down again. That's what I know is missing. Anyway, this is a cool book. And it has many designs in it. Many cool designs in it. Including C-class cruisers, TAM-class cruisers, So basically, if you want the full aircraft carrier cruisers, the whole lot, you go to this book. Where religion is concerned, I will maintain my adherence to existential Buddhism. And the good thing about Buddhism is there's very few leaders in it, and very few people trying to lead it. From my experience of dealing with Buddhism. Although subject to several variations in design, the Fiji group were effectively the last British cruiser group to be constructed. The original design was a variation of Southampton, with the displacement reduced to the 8,000-ton limit imposed by the Second London Naval Treaty. Ships carried the same armament as the earlier class, but weight was reduced, say, by reduction in hull length, achieved primarily by placing the after boilers abreast each other instead of fore and aft. Although the belt armor was reduced from 4.5 inch to 3.25 inch compared with the Southamptons, it was extended fore and aft at 3.5 inch to cover the magazines and shell rooms, and the deck protection was increased to the uniform 2 inch. The end result, although rather cramped, proved very popular despite wartime additions that strained both accommodation and stability. The first stage, which formed the original Fiji class, completed in 1940 to 42. Well, after the suspension of treaty restrictions, and displacement was structurally actually slightly over 8,500 tons. The last three ships, Newfoundland, Uganda, and Ceylon, were completed to a modified design in which the anti-aircraft, aircraft arrangements and X-turret were omitted to make space and weight available for additional close-range AA weapons, radar, and accommodation. Despite these changes, displacement was still higher than desirable, stability less than ideal, and accommodation extremely cramped. The remaining ships of the class also had their aircraft arrangements and X-turret removed during the latter half of the war. The wartime variations in design, the 9,000-ton Swifter and Tiger classes, had these modifications designed in. They also provided for an increase in beam, which improved the level of stability, but in those ships, completed during 1944 to 45, the Ontario, ex-Minotaur, Swifter, and the Superb, the accommodation space problems, albeit slightly reduced, remained. It's always an issue when you're designing a ship, actually having enough space for everything. Especially when you have an artificial limit on what you're designing. So you're not being guided by what you need in terms of your operational requirements, your mission requirements, what your stated goals are, but you're being affected by something which is outside those. That's the problem with the treaties. Archie, one of the battle BGGs was a 1990s version of the New York class gun battery combined with 1,058 VLS cells, Aegis, and a modern hull to hit 33 knots. So, were you planning on taking over whole planets or just, the world? That would be a lot of firepower. That's sure. So it's a book of pure naval smut. Let's put it this way: if I want to get certain gentlemen, if I want to distract a certain gentleman, and I need to distract him in the middle of a bilge pumps video, I go to this book. I go to this page, and I pull it out, and I put it on the screen. And if ever you hear him go quiet, suddenly, this is why. It works well. It works really well. if I want to distract the other one, I do this. It's very handy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if he's really proving interesting to try and distract, this tends to work. The author is John Roberts for this book, Conrad Waters for the cruisers. This is John Roberts with British warships. Don't know what's like around that card. Dr. Thompson. Oh Lord, yes. Which is why my DDH and FG conferences have taken so long. There are space on small ships. No, you need to be actually quite strict on what you want to put them to do, and you need to work through it. Showing sentinels in a video, honestly. Which ships were those? Warspite, Ark Royal, and Ark Royal. Oh god, no. The Ark Royal is enough. No. Oof. If I take it into an actual armored carrier, that's just yeah, that causes trouble. Which one's the one I used? Yeah. When I used this on my poor colleague armored carriers, Jamie, it caused him to stop talking for a good 20 minutes. It was almost worrying. So yeah, we stay away from this picture for Jamie. Oh. Yes, I know. Showing centerfolds in a video. The sort of centerfolds that even YouTube cannot be too upset with me over. Phoenix wasn't... Well, AIM-154 was a Navy project, yes, but it was... how do I put this? The AIM-54, AIM-154 is, of course, the standoff project, a weapon, but AIM-54 was the Phoenix. It was, of course, it's a Raytheon production, and the thing is, Raytheon have basically been at the cutting edge of missile tech for... yeah, as long as they've been around. Don't challenge YouTube. They can be upset at whatever with zero recourse. Now they can be, which does worry me occasionally at the moment now, because currently YouTube is starting to become a big chunk of my income stream. That means I'm entirely dependent upon one company. And when I say big chunk of my income stream, with so far all bar, it's interesting that two big universities are ones who actually pay me the least because I do the least hours for them, are the ones I never have to worry about the income from. They tend to return. They always respond on time and pay me on time. But yeah, considering how some other employers have been mucking around with my pay, please note, none of them the private companies. I am starting to think, ooh, do I need to ensure there are videos on other things other than YouTube as a backup? And what are the other options? Well, the other option, of course, is Twitch, which I could upload some videos to. I do have the videos stored. I could upload them to Twitch, but it's a case of I'd prefer to do that after I've got my setup organized and I've invested that money in getting the setup better, because then that'll make sure their quality's better for Twitch. And honestly, my desire then would be to start dual live streaming to Twitch and YouTube at the same time, hopefully. Or maybe Facebook and YouTube at the same time. Possibly do Facebook and YouTube, because Facebook, I've got a fairly good group already set up for the channel. And that seems to be a sensible way to go, because then that's two separate funding types in a way. Utreon. I haven't ever heard of that, so I have to look it up. But as I said, it's going to be something which is basically $2,000 worth of investment away, which is fun. That's good. Apparently, Prince of Wales has broken down a few hours after leaving port for a propeller shaft issue. I thought she was on her way back into Portsmouth because of propeller shaft issues. Or, well, something broken down. Not sure it's propeller shaft issues. I haven't heard yet what it is. But propeller shaft issues wouldn't surprise me. Those are things which can go wrong very quickly and cause trouble, and are difficult to fix at sea. Captain, aren't the artificial limits of displacement always an issue? Yes, they always are. Ingenious Iron. If the RN had Void Shield tech to equip 4 ships and was in conventional war with multiple significant powers, what ships would you give them to? Yes, subs coming quick. Void Shield tech. In a conventional war with multiple significant Void Shield tech, probably Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales for starters, because I want the carriers. Would I do the amphibs? Probably not, because the amphibs I'd keep back behind the carriers. The question is, do I rely on the astutes being as quiet and as deadly as they are and add on to the darings to protect the group? Or do I go the astutes to give them an advantage to going in and taking out enemy subs and everything in front of the task group? That's a... I'm going to split my losses. I'll stick one on an astute and one on a Type 45, probably HMS Dragon. If I'm going to give any Dragon Void Shield tech, any ship Type 45 Void Shield tech, it'll be Dragon. And one of the astutes. Pick one. They're all very, very good. Preferably a second batch though, probably because they're slightly better. That's true. Utreon is Patreon, but with a proper video hosting service. I'll have to consider about that. Currently, I'm quite wedded into Patreon. Because that's doing that. Honestly, between you should never really be too open about how much money you've got coming in, mainly because, in my experience, the taxman does check these things and hold these things against you. So you're giving a rough approximate, and some months that goes up and some months that goes down, so it's always a rough approximate. But yeah. If I was paying for the computer stuff entirely from YouTube and Patreon income, then in normal months, that would be about 3 months worth of income. So the fact that I'm hoping to pay for half of it with income from jobs and a little bit from very, very kind gifts through PayPal, because I've received a very kind gift through PayPal and a couple of them. Yeah, that basically is very good for me in terms of research funding. There are many, many historians who would be very happy with that level of research funding. We really aren't expensive creatures. I have had this discussion with people and gone, I'm basically happy as long as I've got access to my books, a nice space to go quietly read and write and record videos, and then be able to spend time with my dogs and my family and friends. That's all I really need. I'm a very, very simple creature. I probably should require more, but I really don't. So Prince of Wales needed to have something like a Son carrier? Probably not, no. And honestly, both Prince of Wales and Queen have had issues with their shafts. But that's... I would argue... the issue of the Queen Elizabeth class, from my perspective, and this is getting into deep, deep naval architecture discussions, is that they have there are two shaft fixed pitch propeller design. And honestly, I would have preferred them to be a free shaft design, but I realize for that you would have had to build a slightly bigger design that I've talked about in the past to have the space for all the engines, fuel, and etc. necessary. I just think being a free shaft design would put less pressure on the existing on two shafts and would have given you a slightly higher top speed, etc., and giving you more capability overall. But I understand why I went for a two shaft fixed pitch propeller design. I understand why. It's just not what I would have gone for if I'd been making the choice. But we've already been over before. If I was in charge of the Type 45 project, I'd probably done what my dad recommended in terms of power packs. And if I was in charge of the Queen Elizabeth class project, well, let's see. They would have probably been at the least 310 meters long. Even if I'd had to extend the dockyards to do it, they would have been 310 meters long, preferably 320. And that is literally so they'd be longer than the Kuznetsov, because that's 305 meters. I am that petty. I admit this. This is probably why it's a good thing I'm not in charge of these projects, because there would be money spent on things literally because I am that petty. But also because I know there is a state when you're dealing with capital ships, it is quite literally, in terms of peacetime, in terms of presence, a gentleman taking rulers to the bathroom kind of scenario, or tape measures. It shouldn't be. We'd like to believe the world had moved beyond that, but honestly, the world hasn't moved beyond that. If we put it in a female scenario, I'm never quite sure about this, because I am, despite being the only boy in 40 cousins, I'm not quite sure when my cousins are winding up. My cousins call it the handbag envy. That there is a certain type of guy who obsesses and would take a ruler into the bathroom with them. There is apparently a certain type of female who obsesses over handbags and the status of the various handbags, kind of like the guy in American Psycho obsessed over the bossing of a business card. I still can't believe that was an actual real thing. We'll leave that to one side. As your name is cursed when it comes to prop shafts. Yes, Prince of Wales does have an interesting history of as a name in terms of mechanical issues. It's not one reason. It's possibly one of the reasons why I wouldn't have gone with it. As illustrious as it is in other ways, in terms of battle honors and various other things, there is a history of mechanical issues with the name. That's good. UK Defence Journal said the divers were sent down to check it out and found damage to the prop shaft. Ouch. This is why you need free, because issues happen. RG, in World War II, there are fast ocean liners transporting infantry. What would change if there had been a large, fast freighters capable of 26 plus knots in the UK and US in large numbers? For starters, you would need a completely different type of escort. Flower class would probably still be built for in terms of the standard convoys, but you don't need turbine-powered convoy escorts to keep up that speed across the ocean. If you can move convoys at 26 plus knots, that makes fast convoys very interesting. Very interesting. Researchers and archaeologists are minimalist extremophile organisms. Minimal requirements and researchers and practical functional gear is all they need. Sure, why wouldn't you go foreshaft if you were going to fatten a ship? Because if I'm going foreshaft, then I have to basically rebuild the entire ship. Whereas I can add a section in and make a supply a third shaft quite easily if I'm adding in 30 meters of length. I don't need to fatten the ship. I don't need to do anything. If I'm taking it around 290 to 320 meters, then I can 280 to 280 or something to 390, 280 or 40 meters. If I've got that much space, I'm adding into the hull and I'm giving it a, I can add a third shaft without many issues. If the QAs had 3 shafts, would they need more crew? A few more, but not much more. Not as much more as you think they would. It's not an extra third or anything like that. It's a few more crew, but not a lot. And honestly, they would make things a lot easier because if you have problems with an engine, you can shut it down. You still have 2 to keep you going. You don't go down to 1. So you can cycle through for maintenance and do a lot more preventative maintenance when you have 3 rather than 2. So why not 340 meters? Because the limit on terms of length of dry docks, etc. And if you can keep them below 330 meters, it makes it a lot easier dry dock wise around the world. I'm sorry if we got away from cruisers. The thing about Bruships is it's always, as said, new cruisers, new and random reading, because we always get away from the topic. So I always add in the random phraseology. What do you think of this new home-built carrier? I'll be interested. I'd like to have a trip aboard it and have a look around it. Because my dad always had a lot of affection for, in terms of a lot of affection, a lot of respect for Indian naval architecture. But saying that, I also know that the Indian Navy has a lot of issues with, how do I put this? Organizing adequately, fitting out what we would call routine maintenance. So I would like to see how they've structured that on the ship, because they have it is one of those things, they have a willing and very hard-working crews, but they don't always seem to have success in that actually translating into what they could do. And I'm not sure what the problem is. I don't see any reason for the problem. I just know there often is the problem whenever I've talked with Indian naval officers, etc., that The crew are very willing and hardworking. They are well trained. The officers are well trained. They're all working as hard as they can do, and they still have these issues. And I don't know. It could be the age of the ships they're dealing with. It could be the parts and the supplies they receive back from home. I don't know where it's coming from, but they yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they've designed function down into their design. I never forget a brew. I was asking, but because that's not Naval Battle Direction, she exists. That's the thing. This is the point. She exists, therefore she is. And in terms of status, that's all you need. It's top trumps. It's the only area where top trumps really starts to have a factor. It's not war fighting. Top trumps has a factor in peacetime presence. In terms of who's got the biggest thing when they show up. Listen, 26 knot merchantman in World War II. What U-boat would have had a chance of getting into that? The fast convoys would have been very difficult for the U-boats to get into to attack. It would have been interesting, but you'd still needed escort because there had still been air attacks. As a can you not cross-link prop shots so they can run off on each other's engines? Yes and no. You still need to. There are still the stuff which actually runs the shaft, and yeah, that's different. That's not the guy. That's that drive system. Yeah, you need to be able to shut down that drive. There are those things always work well in theory. In practice, it's always good to not have to rely on it. Have it as an option. It's always good to have it as an option. But again, it's far easier if you have 3 than if you have 2. Actually, natural cruisers. Would there be comedic instances of 26 knot freighters outrunning the Deutschland class cruisers on the regular? Probably after the Deutschlands had been out at sea long enough, they might have done that. Sorry. Got it. I think, is it about the Minotaur and Duke of Edinburgh armoured cruiser that makes them so deadly that when Black Prince and Defence are sunk, all hands are lost? It's the scenarios where those vessels are sunk that leads to all hands being lost, and makes them so deadly as the fact is those cruisers are to an extent they're dreadnought cruisers. They are along the lines towards becoming the proto dreadnought. That's what the Indian Navy has sometimes seemed to have a difference between the allocated budget and funds received. On unrelated note, some politicians got new yachts. Bill Bursick, did you see pictures of the BAE modular strike fighter? Actually, 320 meters will put the Cuban levels within 10 meters of the Nimitz anyway, so it's a considerable increase in length. Yeah, but enough not to be an issue for the Americans to be upset about. Nice evening. Formula One. Belgium is over. Hamilton and Alonso collide on lap 1. How the? You'd think they'd be getting better at avoiding colliding with each other. Afternoon. Being financially dependent on one company. Welcome to working class. Oh, I've been through that for many years. I know I don't have the working class accent, thanks to being a scholarship boy. But being financially dependent on one company, I don't like it. I like to be a multiple income stream kind of person. Multiple companies, mainly because of lessons of watching what happened to my dad. I don't like to be in any scenario where if one company stops paying me, I'm financially ouch. Hopefully, I get some book money coming in soon. Get some books sorted out. Hopefully, there are 2 books which are going with going front of Osprey, and then there's of course my next big book, which I'm currently looking at publishers and going, I wonder who will take a chance on this one, or will I end up self-publishing it? Always interesting. But then I need to sort out the pictures and getting rights, etc., for pictures of. It's easier to do if you have a publisher behind you. It does give you a lot of how do I put this, support in other ways. But there again, and it's a case of they also do produce a nicer hard copy, and I like books coming out as books people can read, not just digital format. And if you self-publish, it's very easy to go down the digital route. And I think, why did the Empire cruise avoid the US Atlantic coast? Because the point was made. The US Atlantic coast wasn't the target. Making Japan and America aware that Britain could reach anywhere they wanted in the rest of the world was the target. Reminding everyone the reach of the British Empire was the target. The Americans, everyone knew the British could reach the American Atlantic coast. There was nothing to be gained, and possibly a lot of issues to be created by heading there. There's also the fact that you're going to be turning up in places where there's quite a strong US Navy presence, and the Royal Navy was very keen to avoid images of Royal Navy ships, a major Royal Navy task group, outnumbered and surrounded by US Navy ships, even in harbour. Indians, and went on Twitch, watch your bitrate. Eric got yelled at by Twitch Sharp because his bitrate was too high, and he's one of the biggest streamers on the site. Nothing wrong. He was merely using the insect to prove what he will do to you if you fail to read the material. No, I'm slightly. It's how do I put this? One of the things I do realize, and I have chatted with my students, that goes, they sit there and some of the students have said, you tolerate far wider questions on the YouTube in the video when you're giving a live than you do in the lectures. And I point out to them that in the lectures, they're all paying. Everyone in the room is paying roughly, once you work out number of contact hours, etc. In terms of contact hours per tuition fees, everyone in the room is paying roughly 40 something pounds to be there for the 2-hour lesson, and they're paying for 2 hours to focus on the topic of the lesson, not to answer questions which are off topic or are not only off topic but are completely outside the module reach. Yeah, that's a no. And that's a case of don't persist with that questioning, or you will be asked politely to leave the room, because you're then disrupting the class for the other people who are also paying. You can go, you're paying. You know, that's a scenario when you're lecturing. When you're on YouTube, answering questions, as long as they're broadly speaking on topic, it doesn't distract, and it's a slightly different pay metric. Yeah. So there is a certain different style. But when I'm making people read the reading list. Oh, I am now coming to the point of view that the reading list is now going to include books in there which have nothing to do with the topic, just to see if anyone comments about them, because if they don't, then I know they haven't read the reading list. Anyone who does comment, I know, has actually read the reading list. And that will be a good basis for them actually going to read the books from the reading list, if they've actually read the reading list. Because I was actually told by one student last week that no, none of the books by this author, who I consider amazing, are on the reading list. And I was sitting there thinking, I know they're on the reading list. I put them in there. No. And this author's fantastic. This author is. I was going, which books are you reading of theirs? Oh, good, but No, I've just read their web article they've recently published. This. Check. Yeah, the web article's really good. The web article was about a quarter of a chapter from their most recent book, which, by the way, is in the reading list. Surprise, surprise. I don't know, between me and the librarian of whom has worked for the university for a fair number of decades putting this together, we had managed to find the new books produced by the good authors. And the new books produced by authors who we think have the potential to be good, because they haven't produced any other books before. So we've got new books by new authors, and new books by historically good authors, and a good mixture. I always like to have a mixture. I usually have some books in there which are from quite a long time ago as well, if I can, if they're still relevant to the topic. Archie, what would happen if a Kirov class beached itself the English coast in the 1980s? The British would probably claim salvage. Also would probably fine the Soviet Union for nuclear pollution. Listen, why don't we know how many people died from the British blockade of Germany in World War I? We do. There are quite a few estimates about it. Again, read Stephen Dunn's book. Blockade by Stephen Dunn. HMS Hood is the ship they sent on my many Mediterranean cruises of Nordic countries and Caribbean on the side. Why was Hood sent more to the Mediterranean? Where is France, Italy, the Ottoman Empire? Or rather, Turkey? They're on the Mediterranean. What is on its way to India? The Mediterranean. What is the key artery for Britain in going to the Far East? The Mediterranean. And if the Hood's in the Mediterranean, then it's one step closer if you need to deploy it further east. So in the Mediterranean, it's got quite a good springboard already to go further east. Try publishing with Ian from Forgotten Weapons. I'll have a chat with him. Jennifer, I've always wondered why the iron stuck with two prop shafts when a four azipod layout would seem more useful, especially as that system is proven capable of giving a faster ship. Probably tradition. It's an interesting debate. There was an actual debate over it. Seaforth, they'll be in the. I'll be talking to Seaforth, but the thing is, they've already turned it down. They turned it down before the first book was even published and came out. So they might change their mind, but in which case I've got an email already saying they turned it down. So the thing is, it's an open market at this point. In which case I might get a better deal from a different publisher. I'm quite mercenary on this front. I like to go with Seaforth again because I like the people who I worked with there. They're really nice people. But I will also go with the person who offers me the best deal and the most financial support. Did the Iron look at Project High Jump as a contingency if they were fighting south of Falklands 82? No. the British have their own history to go with, and also the British have different sort of operational capabilities by that point. And that's one of the things you have to deal with in terms of the Royal Navy. They have also, this is going to sound strange as well, in terms of the Falklands War, and Operation Corporate and various other operations of it, everything was chucked together rather quickly, and I swear half of it that was chucked down there wasn't actually thought about what they were chucking down there. They were just chucking stuff in the ship to go. Americans, going way back to stealing and cunning things off ships, the Yankee SSBN K219 that sank off Bermuda allegedly had a tow cable snapped in the middle and is at its deepest point, according to her captain. The captain believed that a US sub cut their tow. Do you believe that's true? I know when the MERS went out there 2 years ago, MRS, all the silos were empty and void of their missiles. Well, let's put it this way. It's a very fortuitous accident. But I would be. You see, I would. Under those circumstances, you have to go with which navies already have those sorts of systems fitted to submarines. And it would have to be able to do so at going at a quiet pace so it wouldn't be detected. So, yeah. There are things happen, but I wouldn't be necessarily suspicious of the US. Minnesota, you mean questions about the 2020 USN showing up in 1930 where support facilities wouldn't fit into the class lecture topics? No. Although, to consider the recent one that was interesting that came up a student wanted to discuss in the middle class was we're talking about lessons of current engineers in terms of running companies, the experience of engineers in terms of selling themselves as contributing members of society, but also as in selling and developing a brand as a way to sell and support their companies. And I had to be quite careful in steering that round. Certain famous persons who are actually physics graduates rather than engineers necessarily, sex lives, which was a fun one. And recent court cases, which involve people who were apparently involved in those lives at some point. And going, nope, that's nothing to do with today's topic. The old heavy metal band trick. Oddly enough, K19, K129, and K219 all had serious problems sunk. Unlucky numbers in the Soviet ballistic missile force. I'm sure no one was thinking anything which has a 1 and 9 in it should be sunk or dealt with. Nice agreement would be where the nice ones apply to British. Always being wary of the British. I'm sorry, but the British did end up with the largest empire the world has so far seen. That doesn't come about because they're nice. Not in the sort of the loving everyone, being everyone's friend, and being a pushover sense. It really doesn't. RG, the Clarke, would a Veritime fuse for any gun 250mm plus in World War II for Allies for sure bomb have an impact on it? It would certainly not be too unhelpful. I wish live chat would shut timestamped. I do have it timestamped, and if you go to the three buttons at the top on the right, if you pop out the live chat, it does give you an option for the timestamp. For sure, one on to air, have airbus ammunition. You don't have video time. Old school time fuses do nicely. Ground doesn't dodge like Betty or Stukas. No, but you can use it very interestingly for dealing with things like setting it to a height so that it goes off, which is perfect for if it detects a tank. So something in the area versus if it takes it to a barrel VT proximity fuses. Yeah, I know. Sorry, brain went a bit funny then. But VT, you can use that for anti-tank versus anti-infantry, because if you want to take tanks, you want to be a little bit higher than you do for taking out infantry in relative to the ground. Looks like I know the goal was to sink ships in battle, but did anyone consider airbursting shells in ship-to-ship warfare? Actually, they did, and the reason was to wipe out deck crews. So if you were engaging destroyers, etc., which didn't have which had, well, honestly, destroyers, even if they had turreted guns wouldn't have had anything that could withstand it. Basically, you could wipe out the bridge crew, wipe out all the gunners, all the people above above the main deck. But honestly, they decided it was just going to be too difficult, so didn't go with it. That's again, wouldn't the Empire crews visiting New York have drawn a lot of attention? Didn't need to. Again, 9681, you'll go. How do I put this? Sometimes it's as much about the punches not thrown as the punches thrown. When you don't hit someone going down, i.e., Ali versus Foreman, it's style. You go to New York as well. You risk the Americans having a large fleet there and your fleet looking like a small squadron compared to them, and the image of that going around. B, why do you need to? You've already made your point. You go to New York as well, you're just overplaying your hand. You're doing something which is going to risk taking what was a carefully balanced and very well targeted diplomatic operation and possibly risking turning into a provocation, which you don't want it to. You want it to be a reminder, a statement of status and capability. You do not want it to be a casus belli, or rather, a casus furor. You don't want it causing arguments. So no, you don't go to New York. It would draw a lot of attention, yes, but it's also the punch on George Foreman as he goes down. It's inelegant. Then what was used to power catapults? We'll see. I'm thinking elastic would have made the best twang noise ever. Hydraulic. How do I put this? Yeah, it's a hydraulic winch catapult system, isn't it? Let me try and find a picture of it so I can explain it. Yeah. Can I find a decent picture of you? Can I? No, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to. Type H Mark 8 catapult. No, that's not going to work. Mm. I never knew VT meant variable time. Yeah. There are the proximity fuse systems which are that, but there's also the VT variable time one. Yeah. Sorry. Basically, it's a nice way of hiding what you're doing. Let's see. Guys, the Shanos and Nice now did fire a few 280mm flak airburst rounds on Ardent and Arcasta. Yeah, I don't think they did as much damage as the rest did. The secondaries kind of accounted for Ardent and Arcasta. Chris Ryan, is there any truth to the statement that the AA light secondary battery was unmanned during service actions and only manned when under air attack? Pretty much. They would do their best to, because while they're under air attack, they're in trouble. Basically, the general purpose battery would be manned if you're talking about a cruiser or a battleship or capital ship, i.e., the 4-inch or the 4.5 or the 5.25-inch or the 5-inch guns. They'd be crewed. But again, think about some of the AA positions. Some of the AA are literally 20mm or 40mm stuck on top of B turret, or or X turret, or Y turret. That's not exactly a position you want to be in during a surface action, let's be honest. You do not want to be crewing those guns in a surface action. It's a good way to kill yourself. The sheer concussive effect of the guns going off literally beneath you is probably going to have an impact before you deal with the whole impact of the airflow disturbance created by the shells leaving the barrels. You don't want to be on top of those guns when they're firing. So, yeah, there are some positions which are never manned during a surface action. RG, I didn't think the submarine, but with the solar ships, but what if Stalin had decided he wanted submarine cruisers like the various projects with firepower enabled to submerge? Well, it's a funny thing you say that. Da-da-da-da. After the relative success of the Series 2 mine-laying submarines, a new improved the series, X1 was decided upon for the Far East on the 30th of August 1933. At 1,040 tons, the vessel was slightly faster, 14 and a half knots and no, 14 and a half knots and so 8 knots underneath, and could load 16 instead of 12 torpedoes. The mine capacity was the same with 20 mines in two horizontal mine tubes at the stern. 3 boats each were started from April to June 1934 at Roslansky Yard in Leningrad and Marty Yard in Nikolov. For transportation in parts by rail to the Far East, 4 to Vladivostok and 2 to the new yard at Konsol. The Leningrad boats were completed in December 1936, and of the Nikolov boats, 1 was finished in December 1937, the others at the end of 1938. This was followed immediately by new improved Series 13 mine layer of 1,120 tons, with a higher speed, 15 knots on surface, 9 knots on water, and 2 additional 533mm torpedo tubes, but the same mine load. Designed by a team under B.M. Manlin between April 1935 and January 1936. 4 were laid down at the Ozansky Yard in Leningrad and 3 at Marty Yard in Nikolov, and transported in sections by rail to be completed at Dalzotl Yard in Vladivostok during the next planned period between October 1938 and November 1939. From 1930 to 1932, there were discussions about a big submarine of 1,000 to 1,200 tons with 2 102mm guns, 10 533mm torpedo tubes with 24 torpedoes, mines, and a speed of 21 to 22 knots, a range of 15,000 miles, and a 50-day endurance. This led to a project of a cruiser submarine, which was developed by M.A. Rodensky and presented on the 15th of April 1935 by the STO to the Politburo. The idea was to build 20 submarines of this KE Series 14 XIV of 1,480 tons up to 1942, and later on 42 of a successor type. The first 3 vessels were laid down in December 1936 at the Marty Yard and Leningrad, to be followed by 2 more in April and October 1937 at the Onska Yard, and 1 in December 1937 at the Sudetka Yard, also in Leningrad. 5 more followed in 1938, but then the program was interrupted, and of the 12 vessels started, only 6 were ready at the end of 1940. Finally, there were some special test midget submarines. First in 1935, 2 very small submarines of the APSS type of 7.2 tons, with 1 450mm torpedo, were built at the Surmach Yard, and in 1936, the head of the Ostakiro, V.I. Bekure, designed a midget of 18.6 tons named Pygmy, carrying 2 450mm torpedoes, built in Leningrad to be tested in the Black Sea. Tests were promising, but when Bekori was arrested in 1937, further tests were abandoned for the time being. That was the problem. Being arrested, it does tend to curb your ability to actually develop submarines. It's terrible, really. Yeah, and that's what a big sub looks like. I like big subs and I do not lie. There you go. As for sure, are SSNs the modern cruisers? No. At least when it comes to economic warfare role. Not really, because they don't carry enough torpedoes or other systems for the economic warfare role. It isn't really what they're there for nowadays. They don't carry enough. It's actually very expensive to try and sink a big merchant vessel. Although you can do it with torpedoes, it's going to be pretty darn expensive. All those pulleys were areas that caused power drain on the catapult. Once the steam cat with just the piston was introduced, really heavy planes could be launched. The guns weren't crewed for reasons. What were the crews doing? The crews were often had other roles they might be carrying out. So again, if you are manning those guns on the top, you might do something else when you're not needed for them. The other thing is you could be in damage control parties. There are lots of other duties they can. You can. Let's put it this way: a ship will never have spare bodies. There will always be something for them to be doing. Sam Thompson. And Ellswick, Hawkins, and Refuser all come across a mysterious fog bank in areas. They exit in the current day, 2222. How would the Iron use the ships and crews, as neither have aged? An Ellswick type cruiser would go immediately to a museum, and the crew would be put through some kind of rapid education program. Hawkins and Arefuser. Hawkins probably much the same as the Ellswick. Arefuser, now that could be used for something. I'm not sure what it could be used for, but it would be useful because it could be done because it's got 6-inch guns, etc. We can get ammunition for that. So probably the Arefuser would find a use, a modified use, but the others would immediately go to museums. Riyadh and Nakasa, yeah, the commanding officer of the German task force repeatedly signaled the other ships stop wasting main gun and ammunition. Yeah. John, speaking of being near guns and during a surface action, Exeter's gunnery officer standing on White Tower at the River Plate. Have you read any of that? I struggle to see how that would be effective. Basically, that was the only gunnery position he had available left. His control position had been shot through. He had none of the other positions which were supposed to be backup gun control positions. So literally the only spot he could do to try and plot the fall of shot and work out how his guns were doing was standing on top of the 8-inch guns. But there is a difference between standing on a pair of 8-inch guns and standing on top of a 16-inch gun mount. There is a massive difference in that. Hi, John. But just retweeted the article tagging you, Drac, and Jamie regarding the new Danish new modular system and the proposed BAE adaptable strike frigate. Maybe this week's build troubles. Oh, that'd be fun. Now, did the British send a capital ship to the Canal Regalia at some point? I think in 1914 they had a group there. They were the King George V class, the first ones. Where do you think the Ardent comes on the list of great Iron names, given her 20th century record of 3 loss getting stuck into the enemy at Jutland Glorious and the Falklands? I personally, I'm very lauded, and I feel Ardent is a very good name. But if I ever found myself in a scenario where I was being posted to a ship named Ardent in wartime, I would respectfully and very, very quickly and very urgently asked to be reassigned. Darish, you should start another channel on YouTube rapping about ship designs. I'd watch that. That would be good to know there'd be at least one person watching. Language, really difficult to sink merchants. Do you need to actually to sink merchant ships? One torpedo exploding on the keel breaks his back, and that's a long, expensive repair even if the ship survives. That is the truth. Yes, but you also don't carry that many torpedoes. It would be an issue, let's say. Archie, I'm poorly phrased the question. What would have happened if Stalin ordered the various project cruisers as a gigantic submarine cruisers with their surface firepower had been built? You'd have probably seen a submarine cruiser building race going on. I would think the Hawkins would be good for gunnery training, but the trouble is no one uses guns like that anymore, and the Hawkins really doesn't have that good of guns for gunnery training. Those guns were all single guns, and they really weren't. The Hawkins is really not a good cruiser design. Let's just leave that there. The Hawkins is really not a good cruiser design. If they'd gone with a slightly bigger, more sensible design, they'd have probably been far better. How good was the 6-inch gun, 6-inch rapid-firing gun on Tigers? Heard they jammed quite a bit, but on paper they were some of the best big caliber guns in NATO during the early and mid-Cold War. Pretty much, you've got it right. Once they sorted them out, they were fine, but by the time they were sorted out, it was almost time for them to be retired. Ramrosa, did Clarke, this is rather broad, but did any cruisers built for World War I survive World War II? You know, if I wanted a book on RN operations in the Korean War, any suggestions? Operations in the Korean War I'd avoid at the moment. There's not really a good one for British operations out there yet. And on cruisers, yeah, the C class, there's D class vessels. They're all built pretty much for World War One, and they survived World War Two. There's a fair number of other ones as well. And I would honestly, there are some American cruisers which I would honestly not put too far off being World War One design in orientation. So was Hood chosen deliberately to rub it into the face of the USA and Japan that we can stuff you over and there is nothing you can do because we have the most powerful ship? Yes, but not in the way you're thinking about it. It was, we can reach wherever we want in the world. Remember, it wasn't just Hood there. It was also Repulse. And it was basically the British going, we can send a task group wherever we want in the world. We can take out your trade wherever we want in the world. There is nowhere your economy will be safe in the world from us. Which is another reason why we went through South America and didn't bother with the North Atlantic. Because that was the whole point. And America going, you can't be everywhere. And the thing is, for Americans, they did have battleships which could, as a group, definitely could stand up to Hood. But they couldn't catch Hood. They couldn't catch Renown or Repulse or Tiger. And where those ships were is where they would want to be. And the Americans would have to pick where they were going to defend, where they were going to put their ships. Because if you start sending out penny packets of battleships everywhere to protect things, then that's great for the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy battle fleet will go, ooh, hoovering time. Yeah, your battleships have 16-inch guns. Yes, they're good, but can they take on an entire squadron of Queen Elizabeths? No. Oh, that's a shame. So then do you keep them concentrated? Okay, that's great. But that then means your fleet's concentrated, and the British ships are going around the world hoovering up your trade, hoovering up your economics. And you would probably at that point find a British battle squadron be moving into the Caribbean. And why would a British battle squadron be moving into the Caribbean, battle squadron battleships? Well, that will block off the Panama Canal. And if you block off the Panama Canal, you've caused a lot of trouble for America. And the British know that. And the Americans would have to move a fleet out. And now, there's the problem. Where does that fleet come from? Because if it comes from your west coast, then, oh, hang on, there are battle cruisers turning up and bombarding away. If it comes from your east coast, oh, there's battleships turning up and bombarding away. And you're heading down to the Caribbean. And all the way, you're heading into Royal Navy submarines. It's Basically, the British are not. The British do not plan to fight any warfare. They don't fight wars in a fair manner. It might be called warfare, but the British don't fight fair. And to be honest, the Americans are looking at it and trying to work out how they can do the same. That's again one of the reasons behind their cruiser design and their orientation around their cruisers. Is they're thinking about how to fight that way. Again, their problem for that becomes, well, lots of British trade passes through the Mediterranean, which the British can pretty much turn into a lake in a war against the America. Because the Americans aren't going to try and push past Gibraltar and they aren't getting past Suez. Okay, so that means the Americans need to get to the Indian Ocean. Okay, which means I need to get past Singapore. I need to get past South Africa. And that's a long, long way. Again, their logistics aren't there. So yeah, they can possibly blockade South America, etc., to against the British trade. But again, the British will be raiding and blockading the other things, and there is no scenario of war in the 1920s, 1930s which does not end up with mutually assured destruction of Britain and America. It just doesn't. After a really major naval engagement, would there be an increase in munitions production, or did they have sufficient stock to smooth out any increases in demand? 50-50. Depends on the time period when you're talking about, but 50-50 as a rule. There'd be a slight increase in demand, but they usually had quite a fair chunk of stock. Read the effect of artillery upon unprotected humans. I read of German assault guns that were being advanced on by infantry, no machine guns. However, firing their main gun made the enemy infantry combat ineffective. If Stalin gets his way, does Renown get modernized again and hangs around? Probably not, but Vanguard might get a sister. Or there might actually be a Lion built. A post-World War II, a 1944-45 variant Lion. So what chapter of Massey's Castle Steel would have info on World War I Allied powers and propose dividing their on High Seas Fleet? If I know which, I might find it. I think it's in the last 2-3 chapters. John Hamm, fair point. I just figured that the turret officers and the sightseers would do better as they have turret lens. I struggle to find a good book on how the gun turret operates under local control. Any advice? John Lambert's books, especially it hasn't come out yet, but there's one which Norman Freeman's producing from the John Lambert collection, which is going to cover the control of cruiser and capital ships guns and all their designs and weaponry, and that will have all sorts of details in it when it comes. RG, in the scenario of the gigantic submarine cruisers, would battleship large cruisers be kept around in case the Chapayev cruiser submarine service next to a cargo group? Probably. Or Alaska's would be. Alaska's probably something like that would be. Captain to what extent do you think the Empire cruiser Great British White Fleet? Well, the one problem with that is that the British have been doing a lot of Empire cruisers for a long time before the Empire cruise. So it's a case of the Great White Fleet is a model of what the British have already been doing. I'm going to be talking about a few of these squadrons. There's the squadron of detachment and various other things at points which the British have sailing around the world. It's that the British doing such things is quite normal. The Americans doing it are in many ways copying what the British do as a way of peacetime presence demonstration. Even the Russians do it. The Russians do a fair number of cruisers around the world wandering in the 1850, in the sort of the second half of the 19th century. Restaurant, would it be fair to consider treaty design considerations as a square and a triangle, with the fourth corner being endurance range? They are a factor, but less of one than you'd think. It depends on the country, how much a factor, and how they're planning on operating them. Again, when the questions I often get is people go, well, you've got the American ships and the Japanese ships, and you go, yes, but they're designed to operate in a specific part of the Pacific. If you have someone coming up the South China Sea route, then you need different operational scenarios from operating across the Western Pacific. In real life, the Italians trade endurance for speed and firepower on their ships, and the Iron could afford to have a slightly shorter legs than US and IGN due to their network bases. Pretty much. And that's for sure. 94 era line would be a fully realized KGV and would be epic. There was a lot of work done on 16-inch guns for the lines. The Tiger's secondary 3-inch guns had a high rate of fire, I think about 110 rounds a minute. If you had a GW96 as proposed with 4 of those to either side, how effective an air battery would that be in San Carlos Water and Falklands? I know she could have taken hits couldn't have taken hits. Yeah, that would have wiped out pretty much every aircraft coming into San Carlos. Honestly, the 3-inch guns, and the 40mm would have been scary enough. The 3-inch guns firing exploding shrapnel rounds would have just wiped out any aircrafts coming in. That weight of AA would have destroyed them. I'm going to say I'm going to be finishing shortly because I need to go sort things out. But thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to do another 5 minutes. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll answer the last questions now. Captain Seaforth, a Riama supplier for measuring action. Was Jutland even a rounding error compared to the pre-Somme bombardment? Even given the rather large projectiles getting a lot around. It was fairly large. It wasn't. It was bigger than a rounding error compared to the Somme, especially when considering the size of the ordnance. Excuse my ignorance. Guide to weapons. Guide to weapon cruiser. GW. Guide to weapons. How, Doctor, what is your favourite war cry through history? St. George for Merry England and God Save the Queen. Or God Save the King. And nice thing, how often do man parachutes play the iron? Oh, every year. It's very rare in peacetime and even in wartime that our man parachutes, that having enough crew does not plague a navy. Because it's not just having enough crew, it's having enough of the right crew, the right personnel, the right training, the right experience. Thanks, Ninehound Productions. That's sure. Would the Americans have been better off keeping the Alaskas, not the Iowas, or was the exercise more useful as upgrades? It's half a dozen one, 6 the other. If you'd had more Alaskas in terms of numbers built, it would probably have been Alaskas would have been far better to keep than Iowas. But if you didn't have more, you ended up having more Iowas available than Alaskas, and then probably more sensible to keep the Iowas. It's numbers of hulls as well. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Hang on. What's beeping? Something's beeping at me. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's beeping at me. Mm-hmm. What's that beeping? Okay. All right, I'll deal with that. Thank you. Thanks to Christopher Ryan. Thank you, Directions. And nice to know. Why has the Empire cruise fallen in obscurity? Because it was done by the British and because it was one of many. In a nice way, when you do something once and big, it's known and it's historical. When you do it something pretty much every other year, you do something similar. People tend to forget about it. Thank you, Melanie6040. Thank you, Knight6831. Thank you, Michael Coach. Thank you, DG40. Thank you, Alzaski. That was Type 83 article. Again, two perfectionists trying to write a paper together. Thank you, Arasowski. Thank you, M35 Benefits. Thank you, Dick Richards. Thank you, Alistair Shaw. Thank you, Paul Beswick. Jane Liff. Thank you. Thank you. John Herman. Thank you. MI5 has you bugged. No, it's my sister. That's far more bugging than AMI5. Nighttime Productions. Oh, fact, that's one. If the Alaskas have been around in addition to the Alas and Mouthful Fleet in the 1980s, what would have their refits been like and where would they have gone? Well, the interesting thing is the Alaskas could probably have been refitted to a slightly different standard than the Ours, so you never know. They might have even had the full Aegis refit at some point. Thank you, Matrix Fadan. Thank you, Stafford. Thank you, Nighttime Productions. Thank you, Dope Squad. Thank you, Tanner Thurka. Thank you, everyone. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have fun. And again, thank you to everyone who subscribed. Thank you to everyone who shares the videos. Thank you to everyone who comments and likes. Thank you to everyone who's a patron, all those things. Thank you, everyone who does the super chats and the super thanks. Thank you very much because those, as I was mentioning earlier, really do count because A, that increases circulation, which gets more people to hear naval history, which is always a good thing. And B, it's my research funding. And it's currently, for something which is supposed to be the fun thing I do as extra, is turning into the more reliable research funding than anything else I have. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Take care and have a nice evening or day, depending on where you are in the world.